My name is Shannon Boschy. I'm the Ottawa Carleton District School Board trustee candidate for Zone 6 in Ottawa. That's the Rideau, Vanier, Rockcliffe, Sandy Hill area. I'm going to respond briefly to a question about gender ideology in schools. CTV did a piece yesterday, the 21st of August, and this was in response to some groups and individuals calling up myself and another, Chanel Fall, who is running also in the for the school board elections in the fall in Orleans, calling us transphobes and claiming that the rhetoric or the things that we're saying are harming people and causing harm, and asking us the question, do we think gender ideology should be taught in school? Well, this was the explicit question that the reporter asked me. Do you believe gender ideology should be taught in school? And I think the question should answer itself. We should not be teaching ideological positions in school, period. There shouldn't be an unquestioned political doctrine or ideology taught, for example. We would be extremely upset if a fascist ideology or a Maoist Chinese ideology or Pol Pot's ideology was taught in school. I don't believe that in a society that we currently live in, that we should have in public school systems, taxpayer-funded public schools, should we be teaching religion without a counterpoint at all? That's a religion is a worldview or a belief system or an idea, an ideology. And in a secular society, we shouldn't be teaching ideologies in school, period, unless they're presented in balanced ways in comparison and with counterpoints. Chanel Fall is currently under investigation for making the same statement with respect to Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a political movement. It's an activist movement. Its roots are clearly and explicitly stated that they're a Marxist organization. Chanel and a private teachers' Facebook group objected that some teachers wanted to be teaching Black Lives Matter in schools. And her response was the same as mine. Ideology doesn't belong in schools. We should be teaching knowledge, how to read, how to write, basic how to get along with your peers, how to function in the world, how to be a stand-up citizen, how to build confidence in character, and how to do those things proficiently. Not indoctrinating people politically with a teacher's belief system. Those belief systems aren't shared by all people. And so ideology doesn't belong in schools. But let me address specifically gender ideology, because it has some really unusual. So some of the people in comments that I'm getting online are like, why wouldn't we tell people about these things? And this is what the Chio doctor said, who commented on this. Well, why shouldn't we talk about these things? Well, that's a bait and switch. That's a failure to accept or acknowledge what's actually being taught. And gee, we'll just tell people about the fact that there are trans people. That's not what's happening. Gender ideology is based in something called queer theory. It's an academic discipline and concept, right? In my opinion, that queer theory should be relegated to third-rate universities and taught as a bird course. But I will attempt to explicate here what gender ideology is. Gender ideology is based on a concept that comes through another larger set of theories known as critical theory that believes that our culture is socially constructed and has been engineered. This is a bit of a conspiracy theory that somewhere a cabal of white men, the patriarchy, conspired to create the society that we currently live in, and that we need to remediate the oppression created by that white elite male-dominated worldview with countervailing activism. This idea of social constructionism says that we create the world with language, and that who controls language controls the world. and this is the way that these activists are acting. They posit in queer theory that gender is a social construction, meaning we make up gender, and meaning that we're not tied to biological sex, and we can be anything we want. So what's being taught, what came out in the Ontario Human Rights court case testimony this spring between the Buffoni family and the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, is that a teacher was teaching this critical theory of gender constructionism to children at 6 years old, telling children that we make up gender and that you can be a boy or you can be a girl. That's what gender ideology is. Gender is socially constructed, and all the behaviors that we have as men or women, as boys or girls, are imposed on us by a patriarchal, oppressive society. And we learn gender from our parents. They impose because I'm a parent, I raised 4 children, participated in raising 2 stepkids who I love very much, who've been a part of my life for 15 years, and 2 biological kids, my own children from my first marriage. I've raised 4 children and seen them grow up. This theory is that we as parents impose gender restrictions and roles and oppressive categories onto kids. Now, this gives kids a rebellion. Wow, my parents brainwashed me into being a girl. I didn't have to teach my girl to love the color pink and to be cuddly and creative and a great communicator and to want to dress in frilly things and to be soft and gentle, and I didn't need to teach my son to be Bam Bam, where he was, banging trucks against the floor and the walls and like stomping around the house when he was a toddler, which we called him Bam Bam. Boys and girls are very, very different, but this ideology tells children that our parents and our society impose these rigid and oppressive gender categories onto us as we're growing up, and that this is oppression. That comes out of critical theory. So when someone says, oh, gee, well, we must be able to talk about this in school, and what's the big deal about talking about this? No, this is not talking about people who might be trans as adults. This is installing belief systems in vulnerable and impressionable children by authority figures in an institution that have one function, or one of the functions of which is to divide children from parents and to establish resentment in children that they're being controlled and manipulated by gender categories. Now, we threw out the debate about nature and nurture in the field of psychology and psychotherapy decades ago, if it ever was a debate. And the reality is that it's both. It's both. We have a nature or a temperament. Some people call this a set point. Jonathan Haidt of the Heterodox Academy talked about this in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis. We have a set point for various temperamental spectrums, let's say, in our lives, happiness being one of them. A certain level establishes where we're optimists, we're pessimists. We have a nature. And we also have a nurture. The nurture is our social environment. And whether it is toxic, whether it's welcoming and loving, whether it's safe, whether there are too many boundaries, and the combination of those two things, our personal biological natures and our nurture, help us grow into who we are. This is not disputed science. However, these critical theorists, these queer theorists, that's the term for the field of study, the queer theorists, reject the concept of nature entirely. And they believe everything is social construction. They're taught this in university. They learn this in teachers' college, and they're teaching it to children. They're learning it in universities. and then they're going off to teachers college, then they're coming into the school system as teachers and they're teaching it to children. This is a religious idea. It posits that we have a gendered soul and identity that is separate from our body, and that we can manipulate our bodies to match our gendered soul. There's no other way that I can frame this other than in metaphysical terms. Because if we are somehow born in the wrong body, what is being born? If not some sort of soul or some sort of entity or part of us that it's separate from the body entirely. It's very dualistic. It's dissociative. It tears people out of their bodies, teaches them to reject their bodies, and live in a dissociated, out of the body kind of frame of mind, which was being simultaneously exacerbated with the imaginary worlds that kids are going into online. This should not be taught in schools. Critical theory, critical gender theory, queer theory, gender ideology, if you want to call it that. That's the word the reporter used, gender ideology. He was, whether consciously or not, he's admitting in his language that this is a belief system. And it's not a belief system that everybody shares. It's controversial and should in no way be imposed and forced into the school system onto our children without any public consultation whatsoever, and certainly not in the manner that it's currently handled. The way it's currently handled is any teacher that questions this, any parent that questions this, anyone like me who stands up and says, hey, what's going on here with this gender stuff that is affecting so many kids? Anyone who questions it's called transphobic, they're bigots, they're racist, they start getting called MAGA hat wearing Fox News watchers and Trump radicals. I'm very boring. I'm a middle of the road. I own a professional practice. I voted liberal. Last time I voted conservative was for Kim Campbell in the early 1990s when Jean Chrétien was elected. I voted liberal for 30 years. And my personal politics are left of center liberal. Although at this point I would never again vote for anything to do with Trudeau and the current instantiation of the Liberal Party. So I'm politically homeless. This ideology is dangerous. It has negative outcomes, extremely negative outcomes. And because it operates with censorship and uses cudgels of shame and guilt and accusations of being racist or homophobic or transphobic or anti-LGBT. They hide behind the rainbow flag, and we're hiding the negative medical consequences of what's happening to children. Thousands and thousands of children around the developed world are being passed or moved through gender medicalization processes at gender clinics, exploding in numbers, and children are being given puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Puberty blockers have been used to chemically castrate sex offenders until the protest arose that it was inhumane punishment. They're late-stage cancer drugs. That's what they're derived from for treating prostate cancer. And chemotherapy is not a light and gentle process. If you've had anybody in your family go through a cancer drug treatment, these are not gentle processes, and we're introducing these drugs to children at 8, 9, 10 years old as they reach Tanner stage 2 of puberty. They stop natural puberty. They block puberty. There is a whole constellation of complex a symphony of hormonal and biological changes that happens in our own bodies as we go through puberty. And we're playing with that in ways we've never played with before. These drugs were approved for precocious puberty, where children start to develop puberty at 5 or 6 years old or extremely young to try and delay the puberty a little bit to allow kids to develop normally with their peers. Precocious puberty is extremely rare, but the way we're using these cancer drugs now on young children is not rare, unfortunately. We know that when we stop the natural development, biological development through puberty of a child, if you don't go through your own puberty, you're never going to be fertile. So you're going to be infertile. Another word for that is sterilized. And that in combination with the cross-sex hormones. So you stop your own natural development, and we try and hijack the endocrine system with opposite sex hormones, wrong sex hormones, to try and create characteristics of the opposite sex. The kids can't consent to this kind of intervention. We don't let kids get tattoos. You can't smoke. You can't drink. You can't vote. You can't drive a car. You have to be certain ages to consent to sex. You have to be certain ages to get married. When people are making major decisions that are lifetime decisions, we are simply handing this over now to babes who have no idea, have never had an orgasm, have never had an intimate partner relationship, in many cases don't even know who they're sexually attracted to, biological man or biological women, and we're going to stop their puberty. We're going to foist on them our own ideology, our own beliefs that kids somehow know magically this soul, this dissociated identity that exists separate from the body, this metaphysical concept has somehow incarnated. God made a mistake, and gee, we can help you fix it. And if we don't help kids fix it, you know what happens? Well, of course, they're going to kill themselves. Of course, we know that, right? That's what we're told. That's what the doctor at CHEO said. It wasn't aired in the news segment, but the reporter, I have his testimony that he'd spoken with a doctor at CHEO prior to speaking with me, and then we see him on the news, and he says that these drugs are fine, they're perfectly safe, and that this is all hunky dory. It's not. We need a public conversation. This ideology, so one would think that if we're going to be talking about complex mental health issues, identity issues to do with our sex and our gender, this would be part of the sex ed curriculum. Is that fair, right? Because if you're not up on this thing, then it sort of makes sense. Well, if it's in the sex ed curriculum, we've all gone through the public discussion, we remember the various phases of public discussion on the sex ed curriculum. It happens at certain ages and stages, and we've approved this. And there's been politicians, there's been, therapists, there's been we've had inputs from all important voices, and we've listened to everybody before implementing this. But gender ideology isn't taught this way. Gender ideology is being taught in content from consultants, outside consultants, who are coming into providing their materials into the schools, in some cases individual speakers coming into schools talking about this, that are not teachers or not currently teaching. And it's being brought in under the anti-bullying inclusion doctrines within the schools. So no one's allowed to question this because it's anti-bullying. And of course we have to teach kids not to bully. And so we're going to teach them gender ideology, that there's no such thing as biological sex, that we make up our gender roles, that our parents are oppressing us by imposing their stereotypes on us as we're growing up, and boys can actually become girls and girls can actually become boys. If you ever wonder I'm sure you've heard this, trans women are women. That's not an empty slogan. People actually fight for this as a reality, that male-bodied people, by declaring that they're women and dressing up as stereotypes of women, are actually women. Which is strange, because now we call regular women cis women. So trans women are actually women, but real women are cis. That still bakes my noodle. My name is Shannon Boschy. I'm running for OCDSB trustee in Zone 6 in Ottawa. October 24th is the election. I'm talking to people about gender ideology in schools. I have other issues on my platform that I'm deeply concerned about that don't involve medical sterilization of children or dividing children from parents and separating them from the moral education of their own families. I'll talk about that in other videos.